Lavrov denounces as repulsive and unscrupulous statements about the Syrian authorities' alleged responsibility for the terrorist act that targeted Aleppo University. NATO affirms that a political solution is the best for the crisis in Syria and there is no intention for a military intervention in the country. Syrian-Iranian cooperation agreements are culminated in a credit line in the amount of $1 billion and 7 contracts in the field of energy and electricity. Good afternoon, this is Irado Krikorian with the news in English. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov strongly criticized the statements on the alleged responsibility of the Syrian government forces for the terrorist attack which targeted Aleppo University, describing them as repulsive and unscrupulous. In a press conference in Dushanbe, the Tajik capital today, Lavrov said the terrorist attack on the university is an immoral act and any talk of Syrian government's involvement is a repulsive one. Responding to a question on the possibility that the difference in interpreting the events in Aleppo could affect the Russian-US relations, Lavrov said, "I cannot understand how a terrorist act could be a pretext for differences," reminding that heads of many countries and the UN described the events in Aleppo as a terrorist act. Head of the Russian-Syrian Friendship Society, Alexander Dzasokhov, has stressed the deep and solid friendship relations between the Russian and Syrian peoples, expressing his firm condemnation of the terrorist acts in Syria, the most recent of which was the barbaric explosion at Aleppo University yesterday. During his meeting in Moscow with the Syrian People's Assembly delegation headed by Dr. Faiz Al-Sayegh, chairman of the Press, Printing and Publishing Committee at the Assembly, Dzasokhov said Syria is exposed to 2 wars, the first a terrorist war in which all kinds of weapons are used, and the second a deceptive, misleading propaganda war. Head of the Russian-Syrian Friendship Society criticized the hostile stance of the Turkish government towards Syria, which harm both the Syrian and Turkish peoples, and suggested activating work with international parliamentary, social and syndical organizations in various world countries, urging them to hold international forums on a wide scale to stand on Syria's side and condemn the terrorist practices against it. Venezuela has denounced the terrorist attack that hit Aleppo University last Tuesday, killing 82 students and citizens and injuring hundreds others, describing it as terrorist and barbaric. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Elias Jawa has expressed on behalf of the Venezuelan government and people his condemnation for this criminal act, extending his condolences to the relatives of the victims who were killed in the attack. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon had on his part denounced the terrorist act that targeted Aleppo University. The French news agency has quoted the UN as branding in a statement such attacks as ugly and unacceptable and must stop immediately, pointing out that deliberately targeting civilians is a crime of war. NATO Secretary-General Andres Fogh Rasmussen stressed that the best solution to the crisis in Syria is a political one, pointing out that NATO has no intention to intervene in Syria. He added that the aim was to reach a political settlement to the crisis in Syria. He made it clear that there is no international consensus on Syria, referring the deploying Patriot missiles on the Turkish-Syrian borders is pure defensive. Prime Minister Dr. Wael al-Halaqi has discussed with the Iranian Minister of Oil, Rustom Qasimi, the mechanisms of cooperation and joint coordination in the fields of oil and gas, the exchange of oil derivatives and industries in the interest of both countries to meet their development needs and support their economy in light of the economic war and just sanctions against them. The talks were held at the conclusion of the visit paid by Dr. al-Halaqi and the governmental delegation accompanying him to Tehran, where a number of agreements and joint contracts were signed in several domains.
Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halqi has stressed that Syria is facing a universal war with military, economic and financial support by the forces of tyranny and arrogance in the world, with a view of forcing Syria to abandon its stance and national principles and dealing a blow to the resistance axis in the region. Heading Syria's delegation to the final session of talks held by the Syrian and Iranian sides in Tehran, which was chaired on the Iranian side by the Iranian First Vice President Dr. Mohammad Rida Rahimi, Dr. al-Halqi said the forces hostile to Syria have failed to realize their objectives, affirming that Syria will go ahead in bringing about security and stability and meeting the requirements of its people and armed forces in the face of the forces of hegemony and arrogance in the world, maintaining dialogue and national reconciliation among all its citizens, and starting the reconstruction process, relying in this on its own potentials and the support of its friends. On his part, Rahimi denounced the terrorist acts that target the innocent people in Syria, which are perpetrated by armed terrorist groups supported by regional and international forces. He also denounced the terrorist blast that occurred in Aleppo University last Tuesday. Rahimi reiterated his country's support for a political program to solve the crisis in Syria, as it constitutes the objective and direct basis for solving the crisis through national dialogue and political means. The Iranian Vice President referred to the growing relations of bilateral cooperation between the two countries that reflect their deep and solid ties in all fields. At the conclusion of the final talks, the two sides signed a set of agreements and joint contracts that included the credit facilitation line agreement in the amount of $1 billion between the Commercial Bank of Syria and the Iranian Exports Development Bank. The two sides also signed 7 contracts in the field of power transfer and electric equipment.
Minister of Education Dr. Hazwan Al-Waz has stressed the importance of cooperation between the ministry and the UNICEF in light of the current circumstances in Syria. During his meeting with the UNICEF representative in Syria, Mr. Youssef Abdel-Jalil, Dr. Hazwan Al-Waz said 60 schools were rehabilitated and 107 school clubs were opened in a number of governorates. The minister surveyed the damages inflicted on the education sector by the terrorist groups. On his part, Mr. Abdel-Jalil praised cooperation between the two sides, denouncing the ugly crime committed against Aleppo University. The Minister of Higher Education and Damascus University have observed a minute of silence in mourning of the martyrs of Aleppo University. Minister of Higher Education Dr. Wael Maalla carried out an inspection tour to be briefed on the process of exams and the atmosphere in a number of faculties at Damascus University. He affirmed that the teaching process and scientific research, as well as the set exams, would continue in defiance of terrorism. Damascus University students, on their part, denounced the assault against teaching institutions and scientific cadres, affirming that the martyrs of Aleppo University will remain torches on the road of victory. On the other hand, 100 male and female students from the Syrian Students' National Union in Aleppo have taken part in the rehabilitation, cleaning and reconstruction works after the damage caused by the terrorist explosion that targeted Aleppo University and its dormitories last Tuesday. Head of the Aleppo branch of the Students' National Union said, "This initiative affirms the Aleppo students' resolve to continue their learning process at the university and to rehabilitate it so that the students would be able to run their exams." Workshops from the Aleppo City Council and volunteers from the Syrian Students' Union removed the ruins inside the university's 9th unit and in surrounding streets and squares. The Resort airport guards have repelled a terrorist group who tried to attack the airport, killing some members of the group. Regional and Western countries have smuggled lethal weapons and developed thermal missiles to the armed terrorist groups in Syria. A unit of the army forces destroyed terrorist cars in Tal Mtawaq next to Ankhel in Daraa suburbs, seized 2 vehicles. The authorities also seized dozens of missiles, 3 Israel-made RPG launchers in addition to an 82 caliber cannon and a number of SAM missiles, mortar shells and assault rifles. The source added that a number of terrorists were arrested. The Contemporary Lawyers Association in Turkey has cooperated with the National Dialogue follow-up committee in Syria to gather files about the Turkish government's violations against the Syrian people to be submitted to the Turkish judiciary and compensate those harmed. The Israeli occupation forces demolished at midnight last night the Sun Gate camp set up by Palestinians about a week ago on lands that the Israeli troops threatened to seize east of Jerusalem. The Wafa news agency quoted the Palestinian Popular Resistance Committee's news that large numbers of Israeli soldiers arrived in the region and they brought with them bulldozers and started the demolition and dismantling operations after the Supreme Court of the occupation yesterday issued a ruling allowing this. The court also issued a decision to bar Palestinians from reaching the camp. It is to be noted that dozens of Palestinians set up the Sun Gate camp on the 11th of this month in response to the policies of the acquisition of territory pursued by the Israeli occupation authorities to build thousands of settlement units. In Iraq, terrorists unleashed a string of bomb attacks, mainly targeting pilgrims across Iraq today, killing at least 22 people and extending a wave of deadly bloodshed into a second day. The eruption of violence follows nearly 2 weeks of relative calm and threatens to inflame rising tensions among Iraq's ethnic and sectarian groups. The worst attack took place near Dujail, 80 kilometers north of Baghdad, where a pair of car bombs exploded near pilgrims into the town of Samarra. 11 people were killed and more than 60 were wounded in that attack. The attacks in Dujail came hours after a car bomb struck a bus carrying foreign pilgrims near the southern holy city of Karbala. 4 people were killed and 12 were wounded in that attack, according to police and hospital officials. French troops press northward in Mali, territory occupied by radical Islamists, launching a land assault which will put soldiers in direct combat. A trickle of refugees left on foot from Diabali, a town seized 2 days ago by the jihadists, who have held onto it despite a bombing campaign by French fighter jets. According to residents, the refugees arrived in Niano town, 70 kilometers away. French warplanes have carried out airstrikes on Diabali since the weekend, when a column of dozens of rebel vehicles cut off the road to Diabali and seized the town as well as its military camp. In Libya, armed tribal clashes erupted in Sirmin city, west of the capital Tripoli, during which different types of light and medium weapons were used. The clashes are going on between the Maqura and the Muhajib tribes and led to cut the coastal road between Libya and Tunisia, and there were no reports about casualties yet. On the other hand, the citizens of Sabha city, east of Libya, have taken to the street calling for enabling the army and police and providing security to the city. In a statement, the protesters condemned the torture that is taking place in the Libyan prisons, and they demanded for opening an investigation about all torture and death cases and bring the perpetrators to justice, calling on the defense and the general staff to develop a strategy for withdrawing the arms which are spread heavily in the city. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more news about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Khalid Saqabani after a short break.